You're on ABC Radio Newcastle. Craig Hamilton with you this morning through until 11 o'clock. Do you feel safe as a pedestrian in our city? We'll find out whether we should feel safe or not feel safe shortly.
You're with Craig Hamilton
on ABC New South Wales.
Now, what happens when we cross the road at traffic lights or on a zebra crossing? Many of us get around town by foot, whether we walk to work, go to the shops, or just to get to our cars. But are our roads really that safe for pedestrians? Tepi Mclaughlin is a PhD candidate from the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Newcastle, and he's here with some insights. Tepi, good morning.
Morning, Craig.
How likely are we to be injured in a crash if we are a pedestrian?
Pedestrians, it's unfortunately it's quite high compared to other kind of modes of transport and getting around. We know that compared to, say, a car, we're 4 times as likely to be injured as a pedestrian as we are in a car. So the safety element is quite a big issue.
Where do pedestrians fit into the overall road toll in recent years?
Well, we know that the overall trajectory of road deaths is kind of stagnating or slightly going down, but it's mainly been going down because of reduced injuries in deaths from cars. But pedestrians, it doesn't seem to be moving quite as much, and cyclists as well. So we know that there was 138 pedestrians killed in 2020 on Australian roads, which isn't great. But having said that, we know the solutions to get to a safer place for Australians to live in.
And what is the solution?
Well, there's a number that have been put out there. The first one is designing crossings and intersections that are safe for people from the ages of 8 to 80. So whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old or even older than that, you should be able to use a crossing to get from one side of the road to the other. Another solution is that in residential areas where cars are guests and pedestrians and people moving around are the predominant people in the area, we know that reducing speed limits can really help to 30 kilometres an hour, and also introducing footpaths on both sides of the road. I don't know whether you've ever been walking around, Craig, and noticed that the footpath just suddenly ends in some of our suburbs.
Yeah, it does. And I have noticed, absolutely have noticed.
It's one of those things, Craig, that if we can get the footpath to be on both sides of the road, people feel comfortable to walk a short distance, say, to the shops or, down the road to the bus stop. It means we can take cars off the road, which means we can take traffic off the road, which improves overall traffic flow.
I had this discussion, or a variance of this discussion yesterday on the statewide breakfast show about reducing the speed for cars in residential areas down to 30 kilometres per hour instead of 40 or 50 or in some cases 60 kilometres an hour. Do you think reducing the speed limit in some of our regional towns particularly to 30 kilometres an hour would make a huge difference?
It's a really interesting question, Craig, and it's a definite yes from me. And I'll just explain why, because I understand that it's quite a contentious topic and people often get a little bit aggravated by reducing speed limits, and that's understandable. But the big thing with reducing speed limits is it's on residential streets that we're talking about doing this, and shopping streets. It's not the streets that we do a lot of our driving on. So overall, it doesn't impact our journey time too much, but what it does impact is safety. Massive tick for safety. People feel more comfortable to walk a short distance. If that is an 85-year-old person who wants to take the bus to the local shopping centre, they feel more comfortable to do that. And that's what our society should be aiming for. We should be aiming for all people in our society to be able to move around in the way that they want to, and that's good for their health.
Now, I had an argument, well, let's call it no, it wasn't even an argument really, it was a discussion on zebra crossings, probably about 6 months ago. And I was of the view that if you were, as a pedestrian, on walking across a zebra crossing, pedestrian crossing, that you were in the right of way. You could actually not even look if you didn't want to and just walk out on a pedestrian crossing, and the onus was on the driver of the vehicle to stop for you. Now, the person I was having a discussion with said, no, that's not right. It's actually just a guide. The onus is still on the pedestrian to look. Is that right?
I think that's an interesting one. Yeah, I would certainly be looking myself, just because I know that everybody makes mistakes on the roads. That's pedestrians and also drivers. And it's an important one to design for people making mistakes. And there's a term that they're using now in Australia that's called the safe system approach, to design for mistakes. So if a pedestrian walks out onto a pedestrian crossing, maybe it wasn't a pedestrian crossing, maybe it was just a speed hump. So people do make mistakes, drivers make mistakes, people make mistakes. It's about designing things that are safe and don't result in a serious injury or death. And speed limits is one thing that can really help that. Building footpaths so that we separate the traffic from where people are walking. But yeah, no, I would to answer your question directly, I would definitely be looking both ways crossing the road. But as a driver, I'd also slow down every time I came up to a pedestrian crossing as well.
Oh yeah, I always look. I don't take it for granted that the vehicles are going to stop, and that includes traffic lights as well. There's no guarantees there, so you keep your eyes open. Yeah. But I was interested to see who actually legally had the right of way, whether it was if there was an accident on a pedestrian crossing, then who would be in the wrong. Now, Tepi Mclaughlin is my guest this morning, PhD candidate from the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Newcastle. How do we fare here in the Hunter, Tepi? Are our roads up to scratch, do you think, to protect pedestrians?
I think we're getting there in some places. We're widening our footpaths to allow people to walk freely. But some of our older suburbs are a little bit out of date. So the ones that I'm working in Wall's End at the moment, and I just went for a walk to Wall's End Shopping Centre and back, and there is no footpaths on either side of the road, all the way to the shopping centre. And so that kind of thing, we're not really doing so well there. But that probably reflects the whole of Australia. I think not particularly bad in the Hunter. I think you said earlier that you'd been out to the Hunter Valley this weekend. There's been some nice improvements to roundabouts for safety in the Hunter Valley for cyclists. So we're getting there slowly, but the reason why we're getting there slowly is because we're not investing the level of funding that we need to. We're only investing about 2% of our transport budget on walking and cycling, which is incredibly low. It should be around the 20% mark in order to get that safety level.
Now, as you and I have been speaking, Ian from the Hill in Newcastle has sent this text in. Craig, there is currently a trial of a 30 kilometre per hour zone on Newcastle's Wharf Road and Honeysuckle Drive. How has this worked out? I'm not sure, Ian. And the other part of his question is it to be extended to other areas of the city? Tepi, are you aware of this?
I know that Transport New South Wales are collecting some data on this trial in Honeysuckle, which is fantastic, and we're really looking forward to seeing that data. We haven't seen it yet, but what we have seen is data from around the world and around Australia as well, with some other trials going on, that shows that 30 kilometre an hour speed limits work. It's very simple that they work. We did an article in The Conversation last week that talked about how 30 kilometres an hour don't impact on driver journey times, but what they do is improve safety and improve more than just safety. They improve this word walkability. It's this enticing environment that people want to spend time in. It improves the spending in local shops. It gets us having a coffee on the weekend, but by just walking out of our house and walking to our local coffee shop. It's good for social interaction, mental health. There's lots of things tied in here, which is great. We want to address these big problems all together. And all I would say is that if anybody is interested in this sort of stuff, they should check out some of the resources produced by the Heart Foundation. There's a walkability checklist and you can fill it out for your own local area. So if you're in the Hill, you can fill out all your details and have a look and see all the different types of things that can improve walkability in your area.
Now, what about people with mobility issues, like people with a disability? Are we doing enough to protect them on our streets?
I don't think we are, really. No, I think it's the same similar issue here as for everybody. The street should be safe for people of all abilities and disabilities. 8 to 80 years old is something that's often bounded around, but we don't design our intersections particularly nicely for people crossing in wheelchairs. There's been some retrofitting to improve our streets, but because our streets were originally designed as quite wide and fast, that isn't particularly nice for people to be able to cross, say, in a stroller or in a wheelchair. And I think we should be involving people with disabilities in the discussion a lot more, and going back to the argument around how much money we spend on walking and cycling, and I'll include in that rolling wheelchairs, it's only 2% of our transport budget, but we're piling a heck of a lot of money into big fast roads to move freight around and all of these important things that are important for the economy, but we forget about walking and cycling, which is also good for the economy because we know it improves people's physical activity, which then reduces the amount of people that are going into hospital and strain on our healthcare system.
Tepi, if we were to make these changes, let's just talk about Newcastle specifically here in the city. If we were to make these changes and spend some money to make our city more livable and safer for pedestrians, there'd be a lot of money. This would cost a lot of money, wouldn't it, to do this?
I would argue not, compared to some of the big transport projects we're investing in roads and big road projects. We're talking about 20% of the road budget and transport budget here that is needed in order to make livable cities. It will take a few years, Craig. In cities that have done this in the past, it has taken 5, 10, 15 years. Paris are going through it at the moment, and there's been massive changes in Paris, in France. And it just takes a big political drive, and all of a sudden things start to change, and there's a big tide change, and you see lots more people walking, cycling, roaming around in wheelchairs, and it's a lot safer. So I would argue against it taking a lot of money. It's about redistributing our existing transport budget across all different types of transport, including public transport as well.
Tepi, good to talk to you today. Thank you for your insights and for coming on the program.
Fantastic. Thanks, Craig.
Tepi Mclaughlin is a PhD candidate from the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Newcastle. Now, as we were having a chat, we had a text message come through from Neil in the Upper Hunter. He got in touch in reference to the question that I asked Tepi about who's got right of way. If a pedestrian is crossing a pedestrian crossing, who's got the right of way? Is it the pedestrian or is it the car? Is it the responsibility of the driver to stop? And Neil believes it's the responsibility of the driver to stop. It's not a case of the pedestrian crossing being a guide. It's if there was an accident on that pedestrian crossing, the car driver would be in the wrong. 9:25, ABC Radio Newcastle, Brad in Mayfield says, regarding the pedestrian crossing and cars, nobody wants their tombstone to read, "I had the right of way." Brad, never a truer word spoken. Thanks for sending that in. You're on ABC Radio Newcastle. It's 9:25.